When we think about a state-of-the-art spacecraft, we usually picture this um, absolute marvel of human engineering. I want you to really visualize it for a second.
Right, like a massive rocket on a launch pad.
Exactly. A rocket. You have millions of individual parts all manufactured to these microscopic tolerances, working in just perfect synchronized harmony.
Yeah.
You've got titanium thrusters, advanced orbital navigation systems, these incredibly dense fuel payloads. It is a machine expressly built to break the atmosphere.
Oh,
So like conquer gravity itself.
Right, that's its entire purpose.
But imagine you are watching a live broadcast of a launch for this billion-dollar marvel.
Right.
The countdown hits 0, the engines roar to life, the ground literally shakes beneath the launch pad, the smoke billows out.
But it doesn't go anywhere.
Exactly. The rocket doesn't soar, it just hovers, violently shaking like a few feet off the concrete. And as the smoke clears, you see why. Incredibly, inexplicably, there is a single, heavy, rusted steel tether anchoring the base of this futuristic machine directly to the dirt.
It is an incredibly striking image to start with. What you're describing is the ultimate structural paradox.
Right.
You have all that raw power, all that carefully engineered potential, and it is entirely compromised by one overlooked flaw.
Yeah.
You possess the literal propulsion required to reach the stars, but because of this one tether, you are functionally stuck on the ground. I mean, the energy is there, but the trajectory is denied.
The energy is there, but the trajectory is denied. I love that. And that image, that spacecraft straining against its anchor. That is the most perfect, vivid way to understand the staggering, mind-bending statistical paradox we're going to explore today.
It really is.
So let me officially welcome you to the deep dive. I am thrilled you're here with us. We know your time is incredibly valuable. And whether you are prepping for an economics meeting, catching up on global development trends, or you're just, insanely curious about how modern societies actually function under the hood.
Which is why we're all here, really.
Exactly. I want you to know that you are the essential third person in this conversation today. We are promising you a high-yield exploration of some truly fascinating data, and we are going to leave the dense academic jargon right at the door.
That's exactly right. Today, our mission is to unpack a massive, highly detailed development report. It's fundamentally built on this huge trove of United Nations data that tracks progress all the way from 1990 to 2023.
Yeah, over 3 decades of data.
And our focus for this entire hour is a nation that is routinely and rightfully cited by economists and sociologists as the ultimate modern development miracle. We're talking about South Korea.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the data we were looking at in this report paints a picture of a two-faced South Korea.
Right.
And please understand, I don't mean two-faced in a deceptive, moralistic way.
Yeah, no, not
I mean it in a purely mathematical, empirical way. Check this out.
Right.
According to the United Nations Gender Inequality Index, right, the GII, which measures the absolute baseline of reproductive health and fundamental physical empowerment, South Korea ranks as an elite global powerhouse. They ranked 12th in the entire world with a score of 0.038.
Which is incredible.
It is. Out of nearly 200 countries, being 12th means you are practically touching the stars. You are at the absolute pinnacle of keeping women healthy and safe.
But here is where that rusted tether snaps taut. In that very same UN development framework, there is another completely different metric, the Gender Development Index, or GDI.
Okay.
Now, this index doesn't just look at basic health and survival. It looks at the actual ratio of female to male income and education. It measures lived economic reality.
So who holds the capital?
Exactly, measures who holds the capital. And on this specific metric, South Korea plummets from 12th in the world all the way down to 111th.
111th, with a score of 0.959. That is an absolute breathtaking free fall. I remember reading that line in the report and just staring at it.
Yeah, it forces a double take.
How does a country create the 12th best environment on the planet for a woman's physical health and safety, but rank 111th when it comes to her actual socioeconomic development compared to men? That is the spacecraft straining against the tether. It just doesn't seem to make logical sense on the surface.
It's a profound mystery. And before we dive into the actual societal mechanisms that create this paradox, I want to step in for a brief moment and establish some very clear ground rules for our discussion today.
Good call.
Throughout this deep dive, we are going to be dealing with global metrics surrounding gender dynamics, income inequality, and later on, severe environmental impact. Now, we all know these are inherently sensitive, deeply personal, and highly politically charged
Oh,
topics.
that's low.
That is true in almost every single country on Earth, and it is certainly true within South Korea. So I want to be perfectly clear with you, the listener. Our role today is not to endorse any specific political platform. We are not here to criticize a culture from the outside, nor are we here to take ideological sides in domestic debates. Our strict commitment to you is to act purely as impartial guides. We are simply conveying the mathematical reality and the sociological implications that are hard-coded into this official UN data.
We are looking at the numbers, and we are asking what architectural choices built those numbers.
Exactly.
I think that's a crucial disclaimer. We're just following the math to see where it leads. So, setting our baseline, what does this all mean? That is the big question for today's deep dive. What does this profound statistical gap, the chasm between being 12th in the world in one metric and 11th in another, reveal about the true ground-level nature of South Korea's societal structure?
And perhaps even more importantly, as we look to the future, what ultimate price is this nation paying for its rapid, globally renowned prosperity? To even begin to understand those contradictions, we first have to fully grasp the baseline of their success. We have to look at the broader Human Development Index, the HDI. Because, returning to your analogy, you can't truly understand the tragedy of the tether without first marveling at the sheer engineering brilliance of the rocket itself.
You have to understand how high the society was built to fly.
Exactly.
Right. And what a rocket it is. For those who might not look at global economics every day, the HDI is basically the gold standard for measuring a country's overall achievement across its core social and economic dimensions.
That's the big picture.
Yeah, it doesn't just look at GDP, which only tells you how much money is moving around. The HDI looks at life expectancy, it looks at widespread access to education, and it looks at the overall standard of living. It tries to measure actual human flourishing.
Right.
And South Korea's 2023 HDI value is an exceptional 0.937.
To put that specific number, 0.937, into proper context for you, it secures South Korea the rank of 20th globally. Yeah, they are firmly and indisputably entrenched in the United Nations top tier, which is classified as very high human development. And if you want to understand what an achievement that is, you just have to look at the global data set. The world average HDI currently sits far, far behind at just 0.756.
The gap between a 0.756 world average and a 0.937 national score is difficult to overstate. It's the difference between flying in a rickety, unpressurized propeller plane and soaring in a supersonic jet.
It really is.
But what is truly staggering here isn't just the final destination, it's the historical trajectory, it's the speed of the ascent. Let's wind the clock back a bit. If we look at the historical data tables from the report, in 1990, South Korea's HDI was 0.738.
Which was, respectable but not elite.
Right, but over the course of a little more than 3 decades, just 33 years, it has grown by nearly 27%.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of global history, a 27% growth in overall human development in a single generation is practically unheard of. It is a statistical anomaly in the best possible way. What that 27% represents is a nation moving from a post-war catch-up phase, a nation that was still heavily building out its basic industrial and educational infrastructure, to becoming an absolute, undisputed global leader in technology, health, and export economics.
It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
Let's think about the nations that typically occupy the top 20 of the HDI. Most Western nations in that tier took a century or more of gradual industrialization, slow wealth accumulation, agonizing social reform, and incremental infrastructure building to reach that level of human development.
Right, it took generations.
Exactly. South Korea essentially compressed the entire Industrial Revolution, the dawn of the information age, and a massive sweeping expansion of public health and education into a time frame so incredibly short that millions of South Koreans have lived through the entirety of this transformation in their own single lifetime.
Just pause and picture that for a second if you're listening to this. Think about the sheer societal velocity required to pull that off. Imagine you are a citizen who was born in the 1960s or 70s. When you were a child, the economic reality of your country was one thing.
Very different from today.
Completely different. By the time you reach your peak earning years, your country has completely transformed its baseline education system, it has revolutionized its wealth generation capabilities, and it has upgraded its healthcare system by nearly a third. You went from a developing economy to carrying a supercomputer in your pocket,
Mm.
manufactured by a domestic company that dominates the globe.
It's a miracle.
It is the very definition of taking the fast track to the top.
And that is exactly the point we need to focus on, the concept of the fast track. Because that kind of velocity doesn't just happen by accident.
Right.
It requires an immense amount of centralized societal organization, incredibly focused resource allocation, and, quite frankly, sacrifice. When a society decides collectively or is directed to move that fast, it cannot prioritize everything at once.
Certain things have to give.
Certain metrics, certain foundations have to be prioritized above all else to build the launch pad. And what the data clearly shows us is that South Korea prioritized building an incredibly robust, world-class physical safety net and educational pipeline.
Which brings us directly to the first piece of our paradox.
Yeah.
The GII, the Gender Inequality Index, where they rank 12th in the world.
Yes.
Yes, the bright spot. Let's reiterate this because it is a massive, undeniable achievement that deserves profound respect. The GII rank is 12th, with a value of 0.038. And just as a quick statistical reminder for you listening, on the GII scale, closer to 0 is better.
Right. A score of 0 would mean absolute perfect equality in these specific health and survival areas.
Exactly. And the world average is a stark 0.455, so 0.038 is incredible. And the historical improvement here perfectly mirrors that massive HGI explosion we just talked about. In 1990, South Korea's GII was 0.314.
They essentially eradicated the vast majority of gender-based health and survival risks in exactly 30 years.
They took a score of 0.314 and crushed it down to 0.038.
What's absolutely fascinating here is when you look under the hood at the specific health drivers beneath that 0.038 score.
Let's do it.
To calculate the GII, the UN looks heavily at two major health indicators that act as a proxy for the entire medical infrastructure's commitment to women: the maternal mortality ratio, or MMR, and the adolescent birth rate, or ABR.
Okay.
Let's look at the data for maternal mortality first, because it tells a profound story about infrastructure.
The numbers are incredible. In South Korea, the maternal mortality ratio is at an astonishingly low 8.1 deaths per 100,000 live births.
8.1.
I want you to really think about what that means. Out of 100,000 complicated, highly unpredictable biological events, the medical system is capable of intervening and saving the mother in 99,991 of those instances. Now, compare that to the global average, which is 216.0 deaths per 100,000 live births.
Exactly. An MMR of 8.1 doesn't just mean you have good doctors.
No.
It means you have universal prenatal care. It means you have a highway system that can get a woman in labor to a surgical center in minutes. It means you have continuous, stable electricity for incubators and monitors. It is a metric of total infrastructural competence.
Right.
And the adolescent birth rate follows the exact same extreme trend of safety, control, and societal structure. South Korea's ABR is at just 0.5 births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19.
0.5.
Statistically speaking, that is near zero. The world average, by stark contrast, is 39.1.
That is a massive difference.
Even if we look back in 1990, South Korea's ABR was only 4.27, which was already incredibly low. But pushing it to 0.5 means they have engineered a society where early, unplanned pregnancies, the kind of events that historically and globally derail a young woman's education, health, and future economic prospects, are practically non-existent.
Yeah.
Giving birth in South Korea is statistically safer than almost anywhere else on the planet, and it essentially only happens when it is planned for.
Okay, hold on. This is exactly where I find myself getting profoundly confused by the data, and I want to just talk through this.
Sure.
I'm looking at these numbers. An MMR of 8.1 and an ABR of 0.5. This is a society that has effectively neutralized the physical risks of womanhood when compared to the global baseline.
Yes, they have.
They have built the state-of-the-art hospitals. They have deployed the most advanced medical technology. They clearly have widespread, frictionless access to reproductive care and education. If the fundamental baseline of health, survival, and physical safety is this meticulously, brilliantly secure,
I see where you're going.
why on earth isn't that translating into equality everywhere else?
Right.
How do you go from 12th in health to 111th in economic development?
Yeah.
Because intuitively, you would think that a woman who is perfectly healthy, whose education isn't interrupted by early pregnancy, would naturally step into a perfectly equal economic role.
It's a completely logical assumption, and it raises an incredibly important question about what these indices are actually measuring, and more importantly, what they aren't measuring. You have to look at the underlying philosophy of the metric itself. The GII, where they rank 12th, heavily weighs the absence of negative health outcomes.
It measured survival.
Exactly. It measures the societal guarantee of not dying in childbirth and not having your life structurally derailed by a teenage pregnancy. South Korea has, through immense technological and infrastructural investment, perfected the medical and physical safety net. But here is the crucial distinction.
What's that?
Surviving and being healthy is only the absolute first step of human development.
Ah, I see. It's the difference between surviving and thriving.
Exactly that. Being kept healthy by the state allows you to enter the arena of society. It guarantees you make it to the starting line in peak physical condition.
Right.
But it does absolutely nothing to guarantee you have any power once the race begins. The next evolution of human development isn't just about existing safely. It is about holding power, making decisions, allocating resources, and shaping the very rules of the society that keeps you healthy.
Which brings us to the next metric.
Yes. And that is exactly where the pristine miracle image of this rapid development begins to show severe, deeply entrenched structural cracks. We are moving our focus from the hospital ward, where everything is perfect, to the halls of power, where a very different reality exists.
The glass ceiling. Let's talk about political representation, because when you look at the UN data, this is the first major flashing red flag that something is fundamentally disconnected.
It's very stark.
In 2023, the share of parliament seats held by women in South Korea is only 19.1%. That leaves men holding 80.9% of the legislative power in the country.
And this is where comparing South Korea to the world average becomes deeply sobering.
Yeah.
Despite their immense national wealth, despite their world-class health metrics, despite their hyper-modern, technologically advanced cities, South Korean women have significantly less political representation than the global average, which currently sits at 26.5%.
Less than the global average. I want that to sink in for the listener. That means there are countries out there with significantly lower overall human development indices.
Much poorer countries.
Right. Countries that are actively struggling with poverty, or lack of basic sanitation, or developing infrastructure, that are still managing to put more women into the rooms where the actual laws are made than South Korea is.
Precisely. And we know definitively, based on the data we just reviewed, that this disparity in political power is not due to a lack of physical capability or health.
No, you proved that.
But we also know it is not due to a lack of education. If we look at the expected years of schooling, the EYS metric in the report, we see a data point that perfectly highlights the agonizing tension of the South Korean model.
Let me grab those specific EYS numbers from the report. Okay, for men in South Korea, the expected years of schooling is 16.92 years. For women, it is 16.28 years.
Both very high numbers.
Yeah, first of all, we have to acknowledge that both of those numbers are absolutely massive. They completely dwarf the global averages, which are just 12.9 years for men and 13.0 years for women. Both South Korean men and women are getting over 16 years of formal schooling.
It's an incredible baseline of education.
That's basically a societal expectation of earning a bachelor's degree, and often a master's degree, as the standard average baseline. But honestly, I look at these numbers and I have to ask, the gap between men and women here is only 0.64 years.
Right.
We're talking about men and women who are both studying for over a decade and a half. Are we really going to pretend that a gap of just over half a year of schooling creates a massive structural ceiling?
It seems trivial on paper.
It does. It's like watching two elite marathon runners cross the finish line after 26 miles, and one is just 3 seconds behind the other. They're both world-class athletes. Does that half year really matter?
It's a fantastic analogy, but here is where we have to dig into the reality of how this micro gap operates within this specific hyper-competitive society.
Okay, I'm listening.
You are completely right that a 0.64-year difference doesn't seem like much on a spreadsheet. But you have to understand the intense context of the South Korean education system. It is famously, almost legendarily rigorous.
Right.
It is an incredibly steep, demanding mountain to climb from a very young age, involving years of intense studying, late nights at private academies known as hagwons, and incredibly high-stakes, life-defining university entrance exams.
Right, the pressure cooker environment. We've all read about how intense that sorting mechanism is.
So, keeping that pressure in mind, both young men and young women are surviving this grueling academic marathon. They are both emerging highly educated, highly capable, and fiercely competitive.
Yeah.
But that slight 0.64-year edge in male expected education doesn't exist in a vacuum. It indicates that at the very highest, most elite echelons of the system, perhaps postgraduate studies, specific elite professional degrees, or STEM fields that directly pipeline into corporate boardrooms and political leadership men, are still receiving a slight structural preference or are pursuing those final critical months of credentialing at higher rates.
Oh, wow.
And when you combine relatively equal educational quantity with vastly unequal political power, you set the stage for a society where the power derived from education is not distributed evenly.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's not about the half year of schooling itself in a vacuum. It's about what that half year represents at the very top of the spear in a society that uses education as its primary sorting mechanism.
Exactly. The foundational education is equal, but the final translation of that education into societal influence is bottlenecked. And that bottleneck, that exact point where equal preparation meets unequal opportunity, is what finally sets the stage for the massive economic chasm that explains our entire paradox.
Okay, here we go. This brings us back to the central mystery from the very beginning of the deep dive, the GDI, the Gender Development Index, where they rank 111th.
The rusted tether.
Exactly. We've established that the health is world-class, and the education is roughly equal at an elite level. So how does the GDI fall so catastrophically?
The answer lies entirely in how the UN calculates the GDI. Unlike the broader Human Development Index, which looks at the total aggregated national achievement, the GDI specifically measures the ratio of female to male achievements.
The ratio.
Yes, it is a strict mathematical measure of internal parity. It doesn't care how rich your country is overall, it only cares how equally that wealth is shared between genders.
So just to make sure I'm following the logic here, if a country is relatively poor on a global scale, but the men and women in that country are equally poor, they might actually have a much higher GDI rank than a wildly rich country where the men are hoarding all the wealth.
Precisely. You've hit the nail on the head. South Korea's absolute GDI value is actually quite high at 0.959, which is slightly above the world average of 0.955.
Right. They have a lot of development overall.
But because the GDI measures that internal ratio, the severe disparity inside South Korea's own borders causes them to fall to 111th out of 194 countries. The penalty for inequality is absolute.
Wow.
And the smoking gun in the data, the single metric that utterly destroys their parity ranking, is the GNI, the gross national income per capita.
I'm looking at the GNI data right now, and honestly, the numbers are jarring. In 2023, the gross national income per capita for South Korean men is $61,120. For South Korean women, it is $38,370.
Let that settle for a moment. Men in this society are making approximately 1.6 times more than women in absolute terms.
1.6 times.
That is a raw economic gap of nearly $23,000 per person per year.
Let me go back to my academic marathon analogy because this really clarifies it. It's like a man and a woman climbing that exact same rigorous 16-year academic mountain we just talked about.
Right.
You both go to the Hagwons, you both study late into the night, you both pass the grueling university exams, you both get your degrees. But when you finally reach the peak, exhausted but triumphant, and you step out into the actual workforce,
The reality shifts.
yeah. The men are immediately handed a high-speed elevator to the penthouse suites, and the women are pointed toward the stairs. You put in the exact same effort, but the economic payload at the end is entirely different.
That is the two-faced reality entirely explained by the math. The state utilizes its incredible infrastructure to educate its women brilliantly, and it keeps them incredibly healthy so they can participate. But the economic machinery of the nation simply does not reward them equally for that exact same preparation.
Which is wild.
The system is designed to generate highly capable women, but not wealthy or powerful women. And we can see exactly where the stairs start to slow them down, where the pipeline mathematically leaks when we look at the labor force participation rate.
Okay, looking at the LFPR data for 2023, male participation in the labor force is 73.39%. Female participation is 56.07%.
Yeah.
So right there, you have a huge chunk of women who are highly educated but simply not participating in the formal economy.
Now, to be absolutely fair to the historical progress of the country, we have to look at the trend line. Female labor force participation has grown.
Right.
Back in 1990, it was only 46.9%. So there has been steady, undeniable, hard-fought progress of women entering the workforce over the last 3 decades. But despite that progress, a massive gap of over 17 percentage points remains.
If you're listening to this and assuming this 17-point labor gap is just because of a few traditional holdovers from the 90s, the data shows something much more systemic. Why is that gap still so stubborn after 30 years of hypermodern development? We're talking about women with 16 years of education. Why are they leaving the workforce?
It connects directly back to the political power and the broader cultural structure we discussed earlier. In highly industrialized, hyper-competitive economies like South Korea, which is famous for its intense corporate culture and incredibly long working hours, a brutal zero-sum game emerges.
The hours are famously long.
Exactly. The societal burden of domestic labor, elder care, and child rearing still falls overwhelmingly disproportionately on women. Now remember, that 19.1% political representation statistic,
The parliament seats.
because women lack a critical mass of power in parliament, they cannot force the structural legislative changes required to survive this corporate culture. We are talking about things like aggressively mandated flexible working hours, robust and normalized parental leave for both genders, and heavily subsidized corporate childcare support.
Right, the things that actually let parents work.
Without those systemic protections, many highly educated women are structurally forced to make an impossible choice between the relentless, unyielding corporate grind and having a family life. They are squeezed out.
So they just leave.
They drop out of the labor force entirely, or they're forced to take lower-paying, non-regular part-time employment that offers flexibility but terrible pay, which then violently skews that GNI number down to $38,000.
So the state ensures you survive childbirth perfectly with an MMR of 8.1, but the corporate economy essentially punishes you economically for actually having the child.
That is a very stark, very direct way to put it. But the data, the $23,000 income gap and the 17% participation gap, certainly reflects a severe economic penalty for womanhood in the workforce.
Which tells me something profound about how we consume data. Looking at national averages can be deeply, deeply deceptive.
Averages hide a multitude of sins.
They really do. We started this deep dive talking about South Korea's HDI of 0.937, this shining beacon of human development.
Yeah.
But if a massive portion of the population is making $23,000 less than the other portion, that 0.937 is hiding a lot of pain.
Yes.
It's not just an economic divide between men and women. Inequality affects the entire fabric of a society. So I have to ask, what happens if we take off the rose-colored glasses of national averages? Does the UN have a way to measure the actual lived reality of inequality?
They absolutely do, and it is one of the most revealing metrics in the entire report. It's called the Inequality Adjusted HDI, or IHDI.
The IHDI, okay.
The UN essentially recalculates the baseline human development score by discounting it based on how unequally those achievements are distributed across the general population. Because, as you said, averages lie. Let's do a quick thought experiment.
I love thought experiments.
If you have 10 people in a room, and one person makes $10 million a year while the other 9 people make absolutely zero, the average income in that room is $1 million.
Right.
On a spreadsheet, it looks like a room full of thriving millionaires. But the lived reality is a room full of crushing poverty and one oligarch. The IHDI attempts to expose the oligarchs and the poverty hidden inside the average.
Okay, I love this metric. Let's apply this reality check to South Korea. When we factor in inequality, South Korea's HDI drops from that elite 0.937 down to 0.857.
This is a noticeable hit.
The UN data identifies this drop as an overall loss of 8.5% of their human development. They're essentially losing almost a tenth of their entire national progress simply because it is not distributed equally.
And if we break down exactly where that 8.5% loss actually comes from, it perfectly validates everything we've just spent the last half hour discussing about their societal structure.
Let's look at the breakdown.
The UN measures this inequality across 3 specific dimensions: life expectancy, education, and income.
Okay, let me look at the report here. Inequality in life expectancy causes only a 2.5% loss.
Which perfectly proves our earlier point about the GII. Health is highly egalitarian in South Korea. The medical safety net is robust, deeply funded, and it reaches almost everyone, regardless of who they are.
Right.
You don't lose much human development to health inequality because they've solved that baseline.
Next is inequality in education, which accounts for a 6.1% loss.
Again, very solid on a global scale. While we noted that crucial structural half-year gap at the very highest elite levels, overall, the society ensures widespread, near-universal access to high-quality schooling. The baseline of education is incredibly strong and relatively equal.
But then we hit the wall. Inequality in income accounts for a 16.4% loss. 16.4, that is huge.
It is the defining flaw in the miracle. That 16.4% loss in income equality proves mathematically that South Korea's incredible wealth generation is highly, highly concentrated.
Yeah.
It means that while the nation as a whole is vastly wealthier on paper than it was in 1990, large swaths of the population are being systematically left behind the curve of that prosperity. And based on the GDI data we just analyzed, we know exactly who makes up a massive, disproportionate percentage of that group being left behind. Women.
You educate them for 16 years, you build world-class hospitals to keep them healthy, but you concentrate the actual financial rewards of the economy into the hands of a specific demographic. It's a fascinating, if deeply troubling, architectural choice for a society to make.
Choice is absolutely the operative word here. Development is never an accident. It is a series of deliberate policy choices, cultural priorities, and resource allocations sustained over decades.
Well, speaking of choices and resource allocation, this leads us to the final and maybe the most critical layer of this entire report. Because up until now, we have been talking entirely about the internal human costs of this rapid development.
The social side.
Right. We talked about human fuel, the women dropping out of the workforce, the intense study hours. But to generate this level of wealth, to build these hyper-advanced cities, to dominate global exports, that requires physical fuel, it requires raw material, and the planet itself is footing the bill.
You are hitting on the newest and perhaps most globally urgent lens through which the UN evaluates human progress. The Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, or PHDI.
The PHDI.
Yes. For decades, the global community measured human progress purely by what we extracted, what we burned, and what we built, without ever accounting for the ecological debt we were incurring to do so. It was a one-sided ledger.
Right, just looking at the profits, not the costs.
Exactly. The PHDI forces us to look at the true cost of our development.
And when we look at South Korea's ecological ledger in this report, it is a harsh, bracing reality check. When adjusting for planetary pressures and environmental impact, South Korea's HDI doesn't just dip slightly. It violently plummets from 0.937 all the way down to 0.745.
That is a devastating 20.49% drop in their human development score. To put the severity of that drop into perspective for you, when you account for their planetary pressure, South Korea falls 16 places in global standing, tumbling out of the elite top tier down to rank 34.
We have to look at exactly what is causing a 20% penalty on an entire nation's achievement. The data outlines two primary culprits: the carbon footprint and the material footprint. Let's start with carbon because the numbers are stark. South Korea emits 11.15 tons of CO2 per capita.
And if you are listening to this, you might be wondering, is 11.45 tons a lot? To contextualize it, the global average is just 4.54 tons per capita.
Wow.
South Korea is emitting roughly 2.45 times the world average of carbon dioxide for every single citizen.
And the material footprint is just as heavy, if not heavier. For those unfamiliar, this metric measures the sheer weight of raw materials, the minerals, the fossil fuels, the concrete, the biomass extracted from the earth to meet the consumption demands of the country.
The physical weight of their economy.
Exactly. South Korea consumes 23.8 tons of material per capita. The global average, 12.71 tons. They're consuming nearly double the global average of the physical earth.
If we synthesize this, it tells us something profound about the physical architecture of their economy. South Korea's famous fast track to the top, that miracle we marveled at earlier, was fundamentally built on a heavily resource-consumptive and intensely carbon-heavy industrial model.
Right, because of what they manufacture.
Yes, we are talking about massive shipbuilding yards, heavy automotive manufacturing, vast steel production facilities, and energy-hungry semiconductor fabrication plants. These are incredibly intensive sectors. Their current status as a nation of very high human development is inextricably linked to extracting a massive toll from the planet.
They literally bought their prosperity with carbon and material.
They did.
I'm going to fix an analogy I was playing with in my head earlier. It's not like throwing the furniture into your own fireplace to keep warm. It's more like building a magnificent solid gold mansion for yourself. But to do it, you had to siphon water from the entire town's reservoir and pump toxic smoke into the neighborhood.
That's a powerful image.
Yes, your house is undeniably beautiful. You are living in luxury. But the planetary ledger shows a massive, looming ecological debt that hasn't been paid yet. You are wealthy, but your wealth is actively degrading the environment that sustains it.
That is a much more accurate way to frame the mechanism of the PHDI. The ultimate challenge for South Korea, and frankly for many highly developed industrialized nations right now, is how to decouple human development from ecological destruction.
Right.
Can a nation maintain a .937 quality of life? Can it keep its hospitals running and its schools funded without emitting 11 tons of carbon per person? Can they transition the engine without grounding the rocket?
So bringing this all together, we started this hour with the image of a spacecraft tied to a launch pad, a two-faced statistical paradox. Let's synthesize this multidimensional portrait of South Korea based on everything we've uncovered in the data.
The UN data paints a remarkably cohesive, if complex, picture when you lay all these various indices on top of one another. South Korea is an absolute masterclass in building physical and educational infrastructure.
Absolutely.
They took a population that was rebuilding from the ashes of war, and within a single generation, made them among the healthiest, longest living, and most highly educated people on Earth. Achieving an HDI rank of 20 and a GII rank of 12 are undeniable historical triumphs of human organization. But this brilliant societal engine is fundamentally held back by two massive entrenched tethers. First, deep structural economic disparities between genders, evidenced by the $23,000 income gap, the glaring lack of political representation, and a GI rank of 111. The wealth is undeniably there, but the system is designed to hoard it rather than share it equally. And second, an overwhelming reliance on a carbon-heavy, extraction-based industrial model that results in a devastating 20% penalty to their overall progress when planetary pressures are finally accounted for.
Looking at the entirety of this report, there's an implicit roadmap for the path forward. It's almost written into the negative space of the statistics we've discussed today.
Yes, the data tells us exactly what needs to be done.
First, consolidate the wins. You absolutely protect and fund that world-class health and safety net that keeps maternal mortality at 8.1. Second, break the structural barriers. You have to close that $23,000 income gap.
Crucial.
You need to get significantly more than 19% of women into parliament so they can change the corporate culture that forces them out of the labor pool. If they equalize the economic reward for the elite education they are already providing, that GDI rank will skyrocket to match their GII. And third, the green transition. They have to shift that massive industrial engine from a material-consuming, carbon-emitting behemoth into a carbon-neutral model to stop cannibalizing their own future.
What you are describing is the incredibly difficult transition from rapid, forceful growth to mature, sustainable growth. It is the hardest pivot a developed nation has to make.
For you listening right now, whether you are commuting home, walking the dog, or sitting at your desk looking at your own spreadsheets, I want you to take a moment and think about your own environment.
Yeah, look around.
Think about your country, or even the micro-society of your workplace. Are the systems you live within truly balancing health, wealth, equality, and sustainability? Or, like we've seen in the data today, is one metric secretly cannibalizing the others to create an illusion of total success?
It's a great question to ask.
Is your department hitting its revenue targets but burning out its employees in the process? Is your country generating massive GDP but poisoning its rivers or leaving half its highly educated population behind to do it?
It ultimately comes down to what we choose to measure and what we choose to ignore, which leaves us with a lingering, perhaps unanswerable question to ponder.
What's that?
If the ultimate goal of human development is to create a society where everyone, regardless of gender or background, thrives economically and socially without destroying the physical home they live in, does a perfect HDI score even exist anywhere on Earth yet? Or is every single developed nation right now just choosing which fatal flaw they are willing to live with?
Wow. That is a heavy, essential thought to carry with you. We have built the spacecraft, we have engineered the thrusters, but it seems we are all still figuring out how to cut the tethers. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the numbers around you, keep looking past the averages to see the lived reality, and we will see you next time.